Chapter 1, The Paper Bride. The boardroom of Vane Enterprises sat on the 88th floor, a cold sanctuary of steel and glass that looked down upon the teeming streets of Manhattan like a throne room. The temperature was kept at a precise 68 degrees, and the only sound was the rhythmic, soft scratching of high-end fountain pens against vellum paper. Clara Reed sat at the end of the mahogany table, her hands folded tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. Across from her sat the man who was about to become her husband, though he hadn't looked at her once since she entered the room. Silas Vane. At 34, he was known in the financial world as the executioner. He was a man of sharp angles and expensive wool, with hair as black as a raven's wing and eyes that held the chilling clarity of Arctic ice. He was the man who had bought Clara's father's failing shipping empire for pennies on the dollar, and the marriage was the final clause of the merger. Paragraph 14, Section B, a lawyer droned, his voice devoid of emotion. The marriage shall remain in effect for a minimum of 24 months. Cohabitation is mandatory. Public appearances are required twice monthly. There shall be no romantic entanglements outside the union that could bring disrepute to the Vane name. Clara watched Silas as the lawyer spoke. He was signing a stack of documents with a clinical, detached efficiency. He didn't look like a groom, he looked like a man clearing his inbox before a long weekend. Mr. Vane. Miss Reed. If you could both sign the final page, the lawyer prompted. Silas stood up. He was tall, imposing enough to make the air in the room feel thin. He walked to Clara's end of the table and slid the document toward her. For the first time, their eyes met. His gaze was heavy, searching, and entirely unreadable. "You don't have to do this, Clara," he said. His voice was a rich, low baritone that sent a shiver down her spine. "I can find another way to settle your father's debt. But if you sign this, you are mine in the eyes of the law. There is no turning back." Clara looked at her father, who sat in the corner of the room, looking broken and desperate. She looked back at Silas. "My family stays in their home, and the employees keep their pensions. That was the deal." "That was the deal," Silas echoed. Clara picked up the pen. Her signature was shaky, but it was there. Silas signed next to her with a bold, aggressive stroke that seemed to seal her fate. "Congratulations," the lawyer said, though he didn't sound like he meant it. "You are now husband and wife." The move to Silas's penthouse was swift. By 8:00 p.m. that evening, Clara stood in the center of a living room that looked more like a modern art gallery than a home. Everything was white, gray, or black. There were no family photos, no scattered books, no signs of a life actually being lived. Silas entered, removing his tie and tossing it onto a sleek leather sofa. He looked weary, a shadow of exhaustion crossing his features that he hadn't allowed the lawyers to see. "Your things have been placed in the primary guest suite," Silas said, heading toward a wall of glass that overlooked the sparkling city. "It has its own entrance and a private bathroom. I value my privacy, Clara. I expect you to value yours. Is this how it's going to be?" Clara asked, her voice echoing in the vast, empty space. "We just live like ghosts in the same machine." Silas turned, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. "This is a business contract, Clara. You provided the social standing I needed to finalize the European merger, and I provided the capital to save your father. The transaction is complete." He walked toward his private wing, but he stopped at the threshold of a heavy, reinforced steel door that looked out of place against the elegant decor. It required a biometric scan to open. "One more thing," Silas said, his voice dropping to a warning whisper. "The north wing of this penthouse is strictly off-limits. My office, my private gym, and the rooms beyond that door. You are never to enter. Not for any reason." Clara watched him disappear behind the steel door. The business marriage had begun, and she was prepared for the coldness, the silence, and the loneliness. But as the clock struck midnight, Clara was startled by a sound that shouldn't have been there. From behind the off-limits steel door, she heard a muffled, frantic thudding, followed by the distinct, heart-wrenching sound of a woman crying out a name that wasn't Silas's. Clara froze in the hallway, her heart hammering. Silas was supposed to be a bachelor. He was supposed to be alone. But as the crying continued, she realized that the executioner of Wall Street wasn't just hiding a cold heart, he was hiding a living, breathing secret that could destroy them both. Chapter 2: The Rules of Engagement. The morning light in the Vane penthouse didn't bring warmth. It only highlighted the clinical perfection of the space. Clara had barely slept, the echoes of that midnight cry from behind the steel door still vibrating in her mind. When she entered the kitchen, she found Silas already there, dressed in a crisp navy suit, nursing a cup of black coffee. He was reading a physical newspaper, a strange, old-fashioned habit for a man who owned half the digital world. He didn't look up as she approached. "The house staff arrives at 9, Silas said, his voice flat. "They handle the cleaning and the groceries. If you have specific dietary needs, tell the housekeeper, Martha. Otherwise, stay out of their way." Clara poured herself a glass of water, her hand steady despite the questions screaming in her head. "I heard something last night, Silas." The newspaper didn't rustle. Silas didn't blink. But the air in the room seemed to freeze. "The building is old. Pipes moan. The wind rattles the glass." "It wasn't the wind," Clara said, turning to face him. It was a woman's voice. Coming from the north wing. Silas folded the paper with a slow, deliberate precision that was more terrifying than a shout. He stood up, towering over her. The proximity was overwhelming, the scent of sandalwood and expensive soap mingled with a raw, masculine energy that Clara hadn't expected. "Listen to me very carefully, Clara," he said, his voice dropping into a dangerous register. "We signed a contract for business. Part of that business is your discretion. You are a guest in this house, and your only job is to look beautiful at my side during gala season. What happens behind that steel door is not your concern. It is a matter of security. Do not mention it again." He walked past her, his shoulder brushing hers, leaving behind a trail of cold tension. As the days turned into a week, Clara began to map the rules of engagement. Rule 1: They ate dinner together at 7:00 p.m. in total silence. Rule 2: Silas left the penthouse every morning at 6 a.m. and returned after 10 p.m. Rule 3: The north wing remained a dark, silent void. But Clara wasn't just a paper bride. She was the daughter of a shipping magnate. She had been raised to spot the cracks in a hull before the ship ever left the dock. She began to notice the glitches in Silas's mechanical life. Every afternoon at exactly 3 p.m., a man in a nondescript gray suit arrived at the service elevator. He didn't look like a business associate, he carried a medical bag. He stayed for exactly 1 hour and left without a word. One Tuesday, curiosity finally outweighed caution. Clara waited for the doctor to leave, then she slipped into the hallway near the north wing. She noticed a small tray sitting on a console table near the steel door. On it was a discarded meal, untouched, and a small plastic cup containing several pills. She picked up a discarded pill bottle. The name on the label had been scratched off, but the dosage was for a powerful sedative used in advanced neurological cases. Suddenly, the steel door hissed open. Clara jumped, dropping the bottle. Silas stood there, but he wasn't the executioner she saw in the boardrooms. His tie was undone, his hair was disheveled, and his eyes were bloodshot. He looked like a man who was falling apart at the seams. Behind him, for just a split second, Clara saw into the room. It wasn't an office. It was a high-tech medical suite, filled with monitors and a soft, rhythmic beeping. "I told you," Silas whispered, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and exhaustion. "I told you never to come here." "Silas, you're hurting," Clara said, stepping forward instead of recoiling. "Who is in there? Why are you doing this alone?" For a moment, the wall he had built between them wavered. He looked at her, and for the first time, Clara didn't see a billionaire. She saw a man carrying a secret that was crushing his soul. But then, the mask snapped back into place. He grabbed her arm, not roughly, but with an iron grip, and steered her back toward the main living area. "You want to know why I married a stranger?" Silas hissed, pinning her against the wall near the foyer. "Because I needed someone who wouldn't ask questions. Someone who would take the money and be silent. If you can't do that, Clara, I'll find someone who can." "You're a liar, Silas Vane," Clara shot back, her heart racing. "You're not cold. You're just terrified." Silas stared at her, his face inches from hers. The conflict between them was electric, a strange, dark intimacy born of secrets. He looked like he wanted to say something, to scream the truth, but instead, his phone chimed, a high-priority alert. He let go of her, his breath hitching. "The European investors are downstairs. Put on your diamonds, Clara. The show is about to start." As she watched him walk away to compose himself, Clara realized that business contract was a lie. This wasn't about a merger. Silas Vane was hiding a tragedy, and as his wife, she was now the only person standing between his secret and the world that wanted to tear it apart. Chapter 3: The Glitch in the Machine. The gala for the European merger was a masterpiece of corporate theater. Silas was the star, charismatic, decisive, and untouchable. Clara stood at his side, her hand resting on his arm like a decorative vine. To the world, they were the ultimate power couple. To Clara, they were two actors on a stage made of thin ice. When they returned to the penthouse at midnight, the silence felt heavier than ever. Silas went straight to the north wing without a word. Clara waited. She waited for the sound of the doctor leaving. She waited for the rhythmic hum of the building to settle. But tonight, the beeping from the north wing didn't stop. It grew faster, more insistent. Driven by a gut feeling that transcended the contract, Clara approached the steel door. To her shock, it wasn't fully latched. In his haste and exhaustion, Silas hadn't checked the lock. She pushed the door open an inch. The air inside was sterile, smelling of ozone and hospital-grade disinfectant. The room was bathed in a soft, blue glow from bank of medical monitors. In the center of the room sat a bed, and beside it, Silas was on his knees, his head bowed, holding a woman's hand. The woman looked like a ghost. Her skin was translucent, her hair a pale halo against the white pillows. She looked remarkably like Silas, the same sharp cheekbones, the same dark brows. "She's stable," a voice whispered. Clara jumped, turning to see the doctor in the gray suit standing in the corner, checking a readout. He didn't look surprised to see her. He looked relieved. "Who is she?" Clara whispered. "Juliana," the doctor replied. "Silas's twin sister. The world believes she died in the same car accident that killed their parents 3 years ago. But Silas couldn't let go. He spent his entire fortune building this facility to keep her alive." Clara watched Silas. He was whispering to the unconscious woman, his voice thick with a tenderness she didn't know he possessed. "I'm close, Jules. The merger is almost done. I'll have the funding for the surgery. Just hold on." Suddenly, Silas sensed her presence. He stood up, his face hardening into a mask of pure, lethal fury. He moved across the room in 3 strides, grabbing Clara by the shoulders and dragging her out into the hallway, slamming the steel door shut behind them. "You saw her," he hissed, his eyes wild. "She's your sister, Silas. Why is this a secret? Why the lies?" "Because if the board of directors knows she's alive and that I've spent $500 million of company capital on experimental research to save her, they'll remove me," Silas growled, his grip tightening. "They'll declare me mentally unfit. They'll pull the plug on her facility to recoup their losses. I married you because I needed the Reed family's reputation to stabilize the stock. I needed the world to think I was settling down, becoming reliable again." Clara looked at him, the pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. The executioner wasn't a monster. He was a man playing a high-stakes game of chess with the devil to save the only person he had left. "You're using our marriage as a smokescreen for a felony," Clara whispered. "I'm using it to save a life," Silas shouted, his voice echoing through the empty penthouse. "Now you know. The darkest secret is out. So, what's it going to be, Clara? Are you going to call your lawyers? Are you going to ruin the only chance she has?" Clara looked at the steel door, then back at the man standing before her, a man who had sacrificed his reputation, his sanity, and his heart to be a guardian. "No," Clara said, her voice steady. "I'm going to help you. But the business contract is dead, Silas. From now on, we do this as partners, or not at all." Silas stared at her, the defiance in his eyes flickering out, replaced by a look of sheer, exhausted disbelief. For the first time, he didn't pull away. He leaned his forehead against hers, his breath shaky. "Partners," he whispered. But as they stood there in the dark hallway, neither of them noticed the small, blinking red light of a hidden camera tucked into the molding of the ceiling. Across the city, in a dimly lit office, Silas's greatest rival, Marcus Thorne, watched the screen with a slow, predatory grin. "I have you now, Silas. And I have your little bride, too." Chapter 4. The Shadow of the Brother. The shift in the penthouse was instantaneous. The cold, mechanical distance that had defined their first week evaporated, replaced by a restless, shared anxiety. Clara was no longer a paper bride relegated to the guest wing, she was a conspirator. "Marcus Thorne is the one we have to watch," Silas said, pacing the living room at 3 a.m. He had laid out a series of digital tablets on the glass table, showing the fluctuating stock prices of Vane Enterprises. "He's been trying to trigger a hostile takeover for months. If he gets even a whisper that I've diverted corporate funds into Juliana's medical care, he won't just fire me, he'll have me indicted." Clara looked at the data. She had spent years watching her father navigate the murky waters of international trade, but this was different. This was blood. "He's looking for a vulnerability, Silas. And right now, the biggest vulnerability isn't the money. It's the doctor." Silas stopped pacing. "Dar. Eris? He's been with my family for 20 years. He's loyal. Loyalty has a price tag when you're facing life in prison for aiding an illegal medical facility," Clara countered. "We need to move her. Or we need to make Marcus look somewhere else." The conflict turned personal the following afternoon. Clara was at a high-end charity luncheon, part of her duties to keep up appearances, when Marcus Thorne approached her. He was a man of manufactured charm, with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Clara Vane," he purred, sliding into the chair next to her. "You look radiant. Marriage seems to suit you. Though I hear the north wing of that penthouse is a bit chilly." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She kept her expression neutral, swirling her wine. "Silas likes his privacy, Marcus. Most successful men do. Or is that a concept you're unfamiliar with? Marcus chuckled, but his eyes were like flint. Privacy is one thing. A hidden ward is another. Tell me, does Silas ever talk about his sister? Such a tragedy, what happened to her? Or rather, what people think happened to her. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, but she didn't flinch. I don't listen to ghost stories, Marcus. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a gala to plan. She left the luncheon with her head held high, but as soon as she reached her car, she texted Silas, he knows. Not everything, but enough. We're out of time. When she returned to the penthouse, the atmosphere was frantic. Silas was in the north wing, speaking urgently with Dr. Eris. Juliana's monitors were chirping, a low, rhythmic warning. The sedative isn't holding, Dr. Eris said, his face pale. She's starting to regain consciousness, Silas. If she wakes up now, in this state, her heart won't stand the shock. She needs the surgery in Switzerland. Now. The jet is grounded by the board's auditors, Silas growled, slamming his fist against the medical console. Thorne flagged my travel expenses. If I move her, I trigger an alarm. Clara looked from the unconscious woman to the man she was beginning to realize she truly cared for. The executioner was gone. Silas looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. Then we don't use your jet, Clara said. Silas looked at her. What? My father's shipping company, Clara explained, her mind working at light speed. We still have 2 private transport planes in the Reed fleet. They aren't under Vane's audit. We can refit one of them as a mobile ICU tonight. We moved Juliana under the guise of shipping medical supplies to our European branch. Silas stared at her, a mixture of shock and dawning hope in his eyes. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. It was a gesture of genuine, raw affection. The first he had ever shown her. You'd risk your father's remaining assets for this? I'm risking them for my husband, she whispered. But as they began to coordinate the move, the steel door's alarm began to howl. The main elevator was ascending. Silas checked his security tablet, and his face drained of color. It's not Marcus, Silas whispered. It's the NYPD. Someone filed an anonymous report about a person being held against their will. The darkest secret wasn't just leaking. The walls were caving in. Chapter 5, The Price of Silence. The blue and red lights of the police cruisers danced across the glass walls of the penthouse, turning the elegant living room into a strobe-lit nightmare. The elevator was seconds away. Silas, you have to hide, Clara whispered, her voice urgent as she pushed him toward the north wing. I can't leave you to face them alone, Silas argued, his eyes darting to the steel door. Inside, the monitors continued their steady, rhythmic beeping. The heartbeat of a secret that was about to be exposed. If they find you near that room, it's over, Clara said, grabbing his lapels. I'm the wife. I'm the distraction. Go. Now. Silas hesitated for a heartbeat, then pressed his forehead to hers in a silent, desperate promise before slipping behind the steel door. It hissed shut just as the elevator doors chimed open. 3 officers and a man in a sharp gray suit, a representative from the district attorney's office, stepped out. Mrs. Vane, the DA rep said, his eyes scanning the room. I'm Leonard Vance. We received a credible tip regarding an individual being detained on these premises without medical or legal authorization. Clara stood her ground, her heart hammering so hard she was sure they could see it through her silk blouse. This is a private residence, Mr. Vance. My husband and I are entitled to our privacy. Do you have a warrant? We have a wellness check authorization based on a recorded tip, Vance replied, stepping forward. We can do this the easy way, or we can bring in a tactical team to breach every door in this building. Clara laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. A wellness check. On who? My husband is in his study. I was just about to join him. She led them through the main areas of the penthouse, her mind racing. She needed to buy Silas enough time to sedate Juliana further and hide the more obvious medical equipment. But as they approached the north wing, Vance stopped. He looked at the steel door with its biometric scanner. And this? Vance asked. A panic room, Clara lied smoothly. Given my husband's position, security is a priority. Open it, Vance commanded. Clara felt the world tilt. She reached for the scanner, her fingers trembling. She prayed Silas had heard her through the walls. Just as her thumb touched the glass, a loud, metallic crash echoed from the opposite side of the penthouse, the south wing. The officers spun around, guns drawn. Sector 2. Go. Clara used the distraction to slip inside the north wing. The room was dim. Silas had thrown a heavy velvet throw over the main monitor and moved a decorative screen in front of Juliana's bed. He was standing in the shadows, a syringe in his hand. I had to, he whispered, his face ghostly. If she makes a sound, we're dead. They're coming back, Silas, Clara breathed. The crash only bought us seconds. But the price of silence was higher than they imagined. As Silas turned back to the bed, Juliana's hand flopped limply over the side. The monitors, muffled by the cloth, began a flat, continuous tone. She was flatlining. The irony was a jagged blade. To keep her secret, they had to keep her quiet, but the stress of the move and the heavy sedation had pushed her heart over the edge. No, Silas wheezed, lunging for the defibrillator paddles. No, Jules, don't you dare. Silas, the police. Clara cried, hearing the heavy footsteps returning to the hallway. I don't care. Silas roared, charging the paddles. Clear. The thump of the electricity hitting Juliana's chest was followed by a crash as the steel door was kicked open. Vance and the officers burst in, their weapons leveled. They froze at the sight, a billionaire, a hidden medical suite, and a woman who was technically dead. Drop the paddles, an officer screamed. She's dying. Silas yelled back, his eyes wild with tears. Charge to 300. Clear. The room was a chaos of shouting and screaming. Clara threw herself in front of the officers, blocking their line of sight. Let him save her. Look at her. She's his sister. In that moment of tragic clarity, the business marriage died. Silas didn't look like a criminal, he looked like a man being torn apart by grief. Vance signaled for his men to hold their fire. For a long, agonizing 10 seconds, the only sound was the whine of the defibrillator recharging. Then, a soft, jagged blip appeared on the screen. Then another. Juliana's chest rose in a shallow, rattling breath. Silas collapsed against the bed, sobbing into the sheets. Vance stepped forward, but he didn't reach for his handcuffs. He looked at the medical records scattered on the floor. You're Silas Vane, Vance said quietly. You've been keeping a ghost alive. I have, Silas whispered. You realize, Vance said, his voice turning grim, that regardless of your intentions, the board of Vane Enterprises is going to use this to destroy you. By morning, you'll have nothing left. Silas looked up at Clara. He reached out and took her hand. I already have everything I need. But as the police began to secure the room, a news alert flashed on every screen in the penthouse. Marcus Thorne was standing on the steps of the New York Stock Exchange, holding a folder of documents. He wasn't just exposing the secret, he was claiming that Silas had murdered his sister and replaced her with a lookalike to maintain control of the family trusts. The executioner had been outplayed. The secret was out, the person he loved was in a coma, and his empire was burning. Chapter 6, The Glass Fortress Cracks. The penthouse, once a symbol of untouchable power, now felt like a fishbowl. The flashing lights from the street below bounced off the glass walls, and the constant hum of the news cycle played out on every screen. Marcus Thorne's face was everywhere, his accusations of fraud and murder spreading like a virus through the financial world. "The board has frozen your personal accounts, Silas," Leonard Vance said, closing his sleek tablet. The DA representative looked caught between his duty to the law and a newfound respect for the man he had been sent to arrest. "Technically, you're under house arrest until the grand jury convenes. But I know Marcus Thorne. He's not waiting for the law. He's hired a private recovery team to secure the asset, your sister." Silas stood by Juliana's bedside, his hand trembling as he adjusted her foredrip. "They won't take her. I'll burn this building to the ground before they touch her." "Silas, look at me," Clara said, stepping into his line of sight. She was no longer dressed in silk and diamonds, she had changed into dark jeans and a heavy jacket. "We have to leave. Now. Not through the lobby, and not in your cars." "Where can we go?" Silas asked, his voice hollow. "The whole world is watching." "To the one place Marcus Thorne would never think to look," Clara replied. "The Reed shipping docks in New Jersey. My father has an old warehouse there that isn't on any public record. We moved Juliana there tonight." The escape was a masterpiece of desperation. Leonard Vance, moved by the tragedy of the situation, looked the other way for exactly 10 minutes. Under the cover of a simulated power outage, Silas and Clara moved Juliana, now in a specialized transport pod, into a nondescript laundry van. Silas drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, while Clara sat in the back, monitoring Juliana's vitals on a handheld screen. As they crossed the George Washington Bridge, the glass fortress of Manhattan began to shrink in the rearview mirror. "I never thanked you," Silas said, his voice barely audible over the roar of the engine. "For staying. After everything I said, after I told you this was just a transaction." "You were protecting her, Silas," Clara said softly. "I've spent my life around men who only protect their egos. Seeing you risk everything for someone who can't even say your name, it changed things for me. I thought if I kept my heart behind that steel door, it couldn't be broken," Silas whispered. "I didn't realize that by locking everyone out, I was just suffocating inside." They reached the New Jersey docks as a cold, biting rain began to fall. The warehouse was a cavernous, rusting structure that smelled of salt and old oil. It was the complete opposite of the penthouse, gritty, hidden, and safe. Dr. Eris was already there, having arrived in a separate vehicle with the necessary medical supplies. As they settled Juliana into the makeshift ICU, the tension that had been sustaining them finally broke. Clara leaned against a stack of shipping crates, her breath hitching in her throat. The reality of their situation hit her. They were fugitives, their reputations were in tatters, and they were hiding in a warehouse while a billionaire with a private army hunted them. Silas walked over to her, his shadow long against the corrugated metal walls. He didn't say anything, he simply pulled her into his arms. This wasn't the tentative embrace from the tunnel. This was a man clinging to his anchor in the middle of a hurricane. "We're going to lose the company, aren't we?" Clara asked into his chest. "Let them have it," Silas said, his voice firm. "The executioner is dead, Clara. He died the moment you tore up those annulment papers. I don't care about the boardroom. I care about her, and I care about you. But their sanctuary was short-lived." A low, rhythmic thudding began to vibrate through the roof of the warehouse. Not rain. Not the wind. Helicopter rotors. They found us, Silas hissed, reaching for a heavy iron bar. A spotlight cut through the grime-covered windows, illuminating the dust motes in the air. A voice boomed over a megaphone, echoing through the hollow space. Silas Vane. This is Marcus Thorne. I know you're in there. I have the board's authorization to recover the stolen corporate assets. Hand over your sister and the girl, and maybe I'll let you live to see the trial. Clara looked at Juliana, then at Silas. The glass fortress had cracked, and now, the walls were about to come down. Chapter 7, The Final Sacrifice. The warehouse felt like a tin drum under the roar of the circling helicopter. Dust shook from the rafters, coating the medical equipment in a fine layer of gray. Silas gripped the iron bar, his eyes fixed on the massive rolling door at the front of the structure. He looked like a man prepared to fight an army with his bare hands. He doesn't want Juliana, Clara whispered, her mind spinning as she watched the shadows of Thorne's men past the frosted windows. He wants you to react. He wants a confrontation so he can claim self-defense. If you walk out there with a weapon, you're giving him exactly what he needs to finish you. I'm not letting him walk in here and take her, Clara. Silas shouted over the noise. He won't, Clara said, her voice dropping to a chilling, calm level. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her phone. Because Marcus Thorne forgot one thing. He forgot that before I was your wife, I was a Reed. And Reeds don't just ship cargo, they track every cent that moves across the ocean. While the searchlights swept the floor, Clara didn't look for a weapon. She looked for a signal. She navigated to an encrypted server she had accessed months ago while helping her father with his debts. What are you doing? Silas asked, shielding Juliana's face from the light. Silas, you diverted $500 million for her care, Clara said, her fingers flying across the screen. But Marcus Thorne has been diverting billions into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands for years. He wasn't trying to save a sister, he was building a war chest to overthrow your father's legacy before you even took over. A heavy thud echoed against the door. The recovery team was using a battering ram. Clara, they're coming in. Silas yelled. Just 10 more seconds, she prayed. The upload bar flickered, 92%. 95%. The warehouse door groaned, the hinges screaming as the metal buckled. With a final, deafening crash, the door swung inward. Marcus Thorne stepped into the light, flanked by 4 men in tactical gear. He looked triumphant, a man who had finally cornered his prey. Step away from the girl, Silas, Marcus said, his voice smooth despite the chaos. The board has officially declared you a danger to the firm. I am here to take Juliana to a proper facility. And as for your wife, well, she's an accomplice now. Silas stepped forward, his body a shield in front of the medical bed. You touch them, and I'll kill you, Marcus. I don't care about the law anymore. I know you don't, Marcus smiled, raising a silenced pistol. That's why this is so easy. Wait. Clara's voice rang out, clear and steady. She held up her phone. Check your alerts, Marcus. All of you. Marcus frowned, his gaze flickering to the tablet on his belt. The tactical team hesitated, their own devices chirping in unison. I just sent a data dump to the SEC, the FBI, and every major news outlet in the country, Clara said, walking toward the center of the room. It's not Silas's medical expenses. It's your offshore ledger, Marcus. It's the record of every bribe, every kickback, and every ghost shipment you've run through the Reed docks for the last decade. Marcus's face went from pale to ashen. He frantically swiped at his screen. The executioner's rival was suddenly seeing his own execution. You think they'll believe a bankrupt's daughter? Marcus hissed, though his hand was shaking. They won't have to, Silas said, stepping up beside Clara. He realized what she had done. The records are signed with your private encryption key, Marcus. The one you thought was untouchable. You didn't just find a vulnerability in me, you left a trail that leads straight to your front door. Outside, the sound of the helicopter changed. It wasn't Thorne's private bird anymore. The distinct, heavy thrum of state police choppers filled the air. Blue and red lights began to flood the docks, reflecting off the oily water of the harbor. Marcus looked at the door, then at Silas, then at the gun in his hand. For a second, it looked like he might pull the trigger in a fit of spite. "Drop it, Marcus," Silas said, his voice vibrating with a new kind of power. Not the power of money, but the power of a man who had nothing left to lose. "It's over. The contract is closed." Marcus let the gun clatter to the concrete. He fell to his knees as the first wave of officers burst into the warehouse. The climax wasn't a hail of bullets, it was the silent, digital collapse of a villain's empire. As Marcus was led away in handcuffs, Silas didn't watch him go. He turned to Clara, his eyes filled with a mixture of shock, gratitude, and a love that had been forged in the fire of the last 24 hours. "You saved us," Silas whispered. "No," Clara said, taking his hand. "We saved her. And we saved each other." But as the medics rushed in to attend to Juliana, the doctor let out a gasp. On the monitor, the brain activity, once a flat, dormant line, began to spike. Juliana's eyes fluttered. The darkest secret wasn't a secret anymore. And for the first time in 3 years, the ghost was coming home. Chapter 8, Beyond the Contract. The air in the private recovery wing of the Geneva Medical Center was different from the penthouse. Here, the windows didn't just show a concrete jungle, they looked out over the serene, snow-capped peaks of the Swiss Alps. There were no steel doors, no hidden cameras, and no crushing weight of secrets. Juliana sat in a wheelchair by the window, a thick cashmere blanket over her legs. Her recovery had been a miracle of modern science and stubborn brotherly love. While she still had a long road of physical therapy ahead, her eyes, the same Arctic ice as Silas's, were clear and full of light. "She's asking for you," Silas said, stepping onto the balcony where Clara was watching the sunset. Clara turned, a soft smile playing on her lips. "Me? I thought she'd be tired of seeing the woman who helped kidnap her from a penthouse." Silas laughed, a sound that was no longer rare. He walked over and wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her back against his chest. "She knows you're the reason she's breathing Swiss air instead of being a pawn in Marcus Thorne's game. She wants to know if her brother is finally treating his wife with the respect she deserves." "And what did you tell her?" "I told her I was working on it," Silas whispered, kissing the top of her head. "Starting with this." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside wasn't the massive, cold diamond he had given her on their wedding day, the one that had felt like a brand of ownership. This was a simple, elegant band of emeralds and gold, warm and timeless. "The board is gone, Clara," Silas said, his voice serious. "Vane Enterprises is being restructured as a private entity. My father's name is being cleared of the corruption Marcus brought into it. I'm no longer the executioner. I'm just Silas. And I don't want a contract to be the thing that keeps you by my side." He took her hand, his thumb grazing her palm. "Will you marry me, Clara? For real this time? No business, no debts, no secrets. Just us." Clara looked from the ring to the man who had traded an empire for his soul. "On one condition," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Anything. No more steel doors. In the house, or in your heart." "Deal," Silas whispered. 6 months later the wedding was small. Just a few close friends, Leonard Vance, who had become a surprising ally, and a radiant Juliana standing as the maid of honor. They held the ceremony on the docks in New Jersey, the very place where they had almost lost everything. But now, the warehouse had been converted into a bright, open-air community center funded by the new Vane Reed Foundation. As they stood under an archway of white roses, the sea breeze ruffled Clara's hair. When the minister asked for the vows, Silas didn't look at a script or a lawyer. He looked straight into Clara's eyes. "I took a stranger as my wife to protect a ghost," he said, his voice steady and filled with emotion. "But in the darkness, that stranger became my light. You didn't just save my sister, you saved me from becoming the machine the world wanted me to be. I vow to spend the rest of my life being the man you saw when no one else was looking." Clara squeezed his hands. "I married a man of stone, thinking I was saving my family. I didn't know I was finding my own. We started with a contract, but we ended with a truth, that love isn't a transaction. It's a choice we make every single day." When they kissed, the sound of the foghorns in the harbor sounded like a celebration. The business marriage was ancient history. The executioner was a myth. There was only Silas and Clara. Two people who had looked behind the door and found that the darkest secrets can be conquered by the brightest love. As they walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, the sun set over the Manhattan skyline. For the first time, the city didn't look like a battlefield. It looked like a home. What an emotional roller coaster. From a cold boardroom contract to a life-saving mission in a hidden warehouse, Silas and Clara showed us that the best partnerships are the ones where we carry each other's burdens. Their business marriage may have been fake, but the love they found was the most real thing of all. How would you have handled finding a secret like Juliana? Would you have stayed to help Silas, or would you have walked away from the contract? Let's discuss it in the comments below. I love reading your takes on these complex characters. If you love this story of mystery, loyalty, and redemption, please like this video and share it with your friends. And if you haven't joined our family yet, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another captivating tale.